Okay. Okay, so we're going to concentrate on Wisconsin owls, and I'd like to take it from a very sort of Riveredge centric view in terms of habitat and statewide distribution and what it means about a place when you detect an owl there. And I will use the word detect because seeing or hearing an owl is not like seeing or hearing a robin. Um, they're really hard to see, and they're also pretty rare to hear, especially when you try to hear them. Um, so Wisconsin has 7 species of breeding owls, and I'm going to pop the balloon right now and reveal that we're not going to discuss snowy owls. We can go on Facebook for that. I joke, but I mean they're so popular that there's just a ton of resources right now. And if you wanted to learn quite a bit about snowy owls, I think it would be through the DNR. The Project Snowstorm is doing probably the best kind of tracking of them in probably the world right now. Trying to figure out where exactly they're going and coming from and why. But we're going to concentrate on the 7 breeding owls of potentially even Riveredge. Um, so one thing they share in common, they all share a number of things in common, but they all share in common is that they are all voracious and opportunistic predators to a huge degree. And when you look at the variety of food and their voraciousness, you might consider them sort of a pinnacle of bird evolution. Um, there's a famous ornithologist in the Chicago area that just wrote a really big definitive guide on gulls, Amar Ayesh, and he strongly believes that gulls are so diverse and so adaptable that they are really the pinnacle of bird evolution in his research and his opinion. And I'd say owls must be close. Um, a lot of them have enormous ranges, like circumpolar, like the long-eared owl that we consider really rare here because they're hard to see. They're actually at this latitude all the way around the world. The great horned owl is like the entire Western hemisphere. And the short-eared owl is on every continent on Earth except Antarctica. So that must speak quite a bit about how adaptable they are. None of them build their own nest, at least none of our Wisconsin ones. There may be ones in other parts of the world that do. But our Wisconsin owls all nest in tree cavities. Other raptor nests is a real popular choice. Old used ones or ones they've actually got to kick the current raptor out of. Crotches of large trees, rock ledges, old buildings, church steeples, and our true prairie owl, the short-eared owl, nests on the ground. Um, and that ends up meaning a lot for their life history and their behavior because since they're not building a nest, um, nest site choosing a nest site fidelity has a lot to do with their courtship and certainly their environment and the habitat that they choose. Um, and in fact, I ran across this really wild research about if you think about it, if a great horned owl is using a red-tailed hawk nest, there's already been a generations of birds depositing pieces of prey and excrement in that nest. And then now there might be a generation or two of owls in it. And there's people actually studying the microbiome of an owl nest because essentially of how dirty it is. There's parasites of one of them had 47 different species of parasites in this one nest, and it doesn't seem to hurt them. And there was a study in Texas that found out quite by accident they were finding screech owls that would catch these little snakes that I've never heard of called a blind snake. And apparently the blind snake makes some kind of excretion when it's caught as a defense. So the researcher would kept seeing this screech owl carry snake after snake up to the nest, and they were always dead. But whenever it had one of these blind snakes, the snake was still alive. And it was like the screech owl gave up on killing it because it was gross and just threw it into the nest box. This was a study of nest boxes. And they ended up finding out that these little blind snakes were living in the nest box, presumably eating the invertebrates that lived on the reused nest material of the owl. So owls are kind of gross, really, you know. And they all puke like every day. They swallow things whole, or they eat very large chunks of things of their prey, and they're really favorite and famous for swallowing things whole. So they regurgitate the parts that they can't digest, the hair, the feathers, the bones. And there's actually mammalogists around the world that have discovered whole new ranges of small mammals by researching owl pellets. Um, and as far as our cavity nesting owls, that plays into a whole nother type of birds, which is woodpeckers. So at Riveredge, the pileated woodpecker is absolutely a keystone species. The pileated woodpecker is about the size of a crow, and so it makes a pretty darn big nesting hole. And that's big enough for a screech or saw-whet owl to use and potentially use for generations. And it's also big enough for a bunch of squirrels to use that first and then get kicked out by the owl and then get kicked out by another squirrel and then get kicked out by another owl. And so every one of those holes in our trees ends up having a whole drama play out over years. And our barred owl is that's a pretty big animal, and it also nests in cavities. So these cavity nesting owls, especially the large ones like a barred owl, now we can really start to understand the importance of mature trees in a mature forest, and even a forest that has parts of it that are so mature that they're in decline. So a big oak tree or maple tree has a shaded limb or a wind broken or snow loaded limb that breaks out on year 200 of that tree's life. Maybe let's say year 150. And it only the outer part of the tree is living, so that keeps growing around that rotten wood and sort of caps it off, but it's still open and it collects rainwater and that rots out, and pretty soon we've got a large cavity in there. That's on year 200 of that tree's lifespan. And now there might be a decade or two where that hole can raise owls. And maybe they started their courtship in late winter. They incubated for 28 days. Now they're with their chicks. They spend the summer together. Maybe it took about 4 months to fledge the next generation of owls out of that hole. But in reality, it took 200 years to make that next generation of owls. And I think 100 years from now, I can't do any talk at Riveredge without talking about our deer population. I think 100 years from now, we'll be tying the decline of barred owls in this area to our burgeoning deer population, because that next 200-year-old tree is not being made. I'm done with deer. So our owls are also all, to a large degree, nocturnal, or at least crepuscular. That's a fun one, and that means dawn and dusk. It's you look at any of these gorgeous coffee table books about owls, and there's all of these amazing pictures of them in broad daylight. I don't really know how they get them. It's a little hard for me to understand, because they're all they all have one common behavior during the day, which is standing absolutely still somewhere, and it's usually as secluded as they can be. And so that means a lot for the habitat requirements too. Old trees with breaks in them where they can use their camouflage to look like a broken piece of wood. Tree cavities that they can suck down into and look like the interior of that wood. They're all amazingly camouflaged, and they tend to even pick trees that look like them. And coniferous trees, proximity of coniferous trees to a roosting site can be a good place to find owls, because say a Norway spruce with big hanging branches like so, or really dense pockets of young conifers, especially maybe our native white spruce, or obviously maybe the king of all owl roosting trees would be our native white cedar. If they get it up in there, you've got to crawl in there and look up the trunk to find them. And our other owls that we have also they roost in really dense, say, shrub willows. So shrub cars on the edge of a forest. The Okay, I'm gonna switch a slide here. Oh, this is a whimsical one Mary found. Uh, Pointed at that.
This the atrium, right? Not use the arrows on your computer.
Oh, oh, is that holding it backwards essentially?
No, it's frozen. You've been on the same slides and too long.
Okay.
Right, the arrows.
It's not letting me escape you. Oh, there it is. Okay, let's start over here.
Back to sharing.
Um, from current slide.
No, two.
Okay, there we go.
Okay.
This is a whimsical one. I don't know the story here. We could see the size. We could see the size comparison. They come in all sizes in Wisconsin. From the little, I don't even know what that really dark little one is, but then there's the screech owl going on up in size there. So I'm going to get right into species accounts. There's a lot of interesting things about owl anatomy that I think we might not have time for when we talk about habitat and behavior and sound. So in all of these slides of the initial species introduction, oh, I'm going to back up. I forgot to say something. So from these 7 species of owls that breed in the state, I'm starting with the most likely to be detected, against maybe seen, more often heard at Riveredge, and go to the least common, the least likely to be detected at Riveredge. And I guess by Riveredge, I mean southeast Wisconsin, really.
So, species of owl, what is that? So that's what we're starting out to. What is that?
Someone can answer this one. It's the great horned owl. And all of these, I don't care if I was given a speech on geology, I would probably talk about white-tailed deer and the Wisconsin breeding bird atlas. And in all of these, we have Mary kindly added these for me, which is there were 2 projects in Wisconsin. They're happening in several states. I'll just talk about it real quickly. It's a citizen science-based project, fairly rigorous kind of citizen science, where the entire state was split up in 3-mile by 9-mile blocks. And statisticians and ecologists come up with sort of faults for the data on this or that technical level, but it still has to be the most granular view of Wisconsin that we have on bird distribution. So the first one that these are from was from 1995 to 2000. And the second one was from 2015 to 2020. And that data is it takes years to compile all this. And that data is about to come out. And it will be in a big hardcover book and also in a website for everyone to use. So they're statewide. And if we jump ahead, as I said, they are Western Hemisphere wide. But what's interesting with them in their distribution in Wisconsin is, look at this. I mean, that is the heaviest farmed and built area of Wisconsin. So they certainly like it in Vilas County, but they're really excelling in our urban and agricultural landscape. They have adapted very well to human presence, and we're making forest edge types that they like. They hunt on big horizontal branches over farm fields often. And so they are one of the most adaptable and widespread raptor in the Western Hemisphere. They can be from absolute wilderness to a dead tree behind a Walmart. They are one of the writers in the Wisconsin Breeding Bird Atlas said that you are probably always 2 miles from a great horned owl. Um, and I'm going to compare that, kind of remember that cluster in southeast Wisconsin there on this map, because when we jump ahead to the barred owl, we see a marked difference. Um, their favorite nest, they don't nest in cavities all that often, but their favorite, interestingly, in the tundra, they nest in old animal cavities. In the desert, they nest on the ground. But in Wisconsin, their favorite nest, and the only nests I've ever found of a great horned owl, have been in old red-tailed hawk nests. And I always thought that surely those nests were abandoned until I read an Arthur Cleveland Bent series on birds, some of you have probably heard of, that they were documented not only evicting the red-tailed hawks from the nest, but also killing and eating them. And in fact, on that note, on that note, here is just a brief, list of prey they've been documented as eating. Hares, rabbits, gray, red, flying fox, squirrels, in daytime will strike at leaf nests of squirrels to flush them out in the open, eats chipmunks, wood rats, Norway rats, mice, muskrats, minks, weasels, skunks. Owls' body feathers often smell strongly of skunk. Ground squirrels, pocket gophers, woodchucks, possums, even attacks porcupines and gets killed by them. Large snakes, domestic cats, bats. And it also kills and eats grebes, wild ducks, Canada geese, swans, bitterns, small herons, coots, gallinus, rails, phalaropes, pheasants, grouse, domestic turkeys, chickens, guinea fowl, mourning doves, marsh, coopers, red-tailed hawks, red-shouldered hawks, barred, long-eared owls, yes, screech owls, flickers, other woodpeckers, jays, crows, blackbirds, meadowlarks, snowbuntings, juncos, sparrows, mockingbirds, robins, and even descends into house chimney to catch swifts one time. And then they eat frogs, eels, dace, goldfish, bullheads, crayfishes, crickets, beetles, grasshoppers, katydids, and scorpions. And in Florida, great horned owls have been seen eating baby alligators.
Just a quick note, I have a friend that worked at the zoo. Yes, they also eat penguins.
Okay.
They were out thinking penguins.
So there's a new one. That's a good one. So they are absolutely voracious predators. They've got a lot of babies to feed. They've got a really high metabolism. They survive the winter. They don't migrate. And so they eat a lot. And they eat basically everything that moves. Has anybody, I'm going to switch to an audio recording. Has anybody grown up with the country wisdom that when you find a decapitated rabbit or other animal, it was the work of a great horned owl? Is that something? I mean, I grew up believing that. And I questioned why when I started doing this research. Why do I assume that's a great horned owl? And I asked around, and it seemed like everybody in the country believes that. So I bothered to call the International Owl Center. And the woman there agreed. And the reason is because they're such killing machines that they'll kill a rabbit when they don't intend to eat the whole thing. And for them, some of the most nutritious part is the skull. And at the International Owl Center, they feed them these pocket gophers, which are apparently pretty thick skulls. And they watch them just crunch the head, and they eat the part of the skull with the brain attached, and they regurgitate the skull. And I've got a picture coming up of sorry, you can't talk about owls without getting grizzly. Sorry, guys. Okay, here is a classic breeding call. That often can be heard in groups like that, responding to each other. And so they stay together as a family group for a long time after the young fledge, like the whole rest of the summer. And so I think we're all very familiar with that breeding song of the great horn. But you'll have more fun in the summer if you learn the sound of the begging juveniles, which you can actually hear. I mean, standing out in the middle of, say, like a 40-acre farm field, you can hear them on the fence lines, one here, one there, one here, and they'll go all night begging and or fighting and competing with each other. And I've got a recording here of a group very close to the microphone. The percussive sounds you hear in this are their bills. They clap their bills together. A lot of species of owls do this in close interaction and especially aggressive interactions. And if you hear closely in this, you can hear them. If you listen closely, you can hear them landing on branches and you can even hear their wings. And I think in this clip, you can also hear a rooster, which is because this is recorded about 5:30 in the morning. And it's a great place sound because you can hear a rooster. It would be even better if we could hear a cow. That little musical, that's also them. Listen for a trill. You got a really wide repertoire of sounds. Little trills coming up there. They whistle like little songbirds. Okay, now they grew up and went away. And another thing that's fun when you're listening to great horned owls is to recognize the male from the female, which I think we see in this. This is a bit of a rare recording, and I'm going to jump ahead 2 species here because great horned owls eat all other owls in Wisconsin, at least of our breeders. They are the biggest owl and the most ferocious, and they eat all of our other owls. And so it's very common wisdom if you do these owl prowls that we do around here, where we do the thing that we shouldn't all do a lot of time. By the way, none of these recordings were made by me making a recording and getting that to the respond. But we do that for the public on a hike sometimes. And we always start with the biggest owls, or excuse me, we always start with the smallest owls because the theory is that if you play the biggest owls first, the smallest owls will never make a peep. Well, here's a recording I made where one of the smallest owls in Wisconsin is happily doing a whole vocal repertoire in the same 100 feet as a pair of great horned owls. So that was our brave little screech owls. Now that was a male great horned owl. These are the screech owls, the descending wing. That's the female with an extra beat in her song and a little higher pitch. The monotone is also the screech owl. It's the second half of one of their territorial songs. And again, this is not in the middle of nowhere. These are my neighbor's coon dogs. The screech owl gets real expressive at but in the interest of time, I'm going to stop this because I've got some more close-up ones of them. Okay, see if I get this right. Yeah. Just do this. They're one of the earliest, they're probably the earliest nesting bird in Wisconsin, not just owl. The only thing that would rival them in early breeding, and they probably don't even breed in the state every year, is red crossbills as a songbird that nests in winter. But we had to find a picture of a mama owl covered in snow because they're on the nest now, most likely.
One year, they find owls right there, so they were already hatched out by about the 1st of March.
And they're, yeah, something didn't make it. And all over that field, there were rodent tracks in the snow and rabbit tracks in the snow. But here, there are no tracks in the snow, yet a bird took a plunge into the snow, which made me think it was an owl because they could hear probably a vole under the snow.
It came out of the skunk, so you can see exactly where the skunk sprayed. The skunk.
Wow.
Now.
Cool.
Skunk.
And here's from this winter a saw-whet owl missing its head. Just happened to be hung up in some buckthorn. And the woman that I contacted at the International Owl Center said she was pretty confident she would attribute that to a great horned owl. Okay, we're on to the barred owl. Second, barred owl, great horned, I would say are kind of tied at Riveredge for most easily detectable. And you could argue the barred owl will be a little more detectable because if there's one owl I ever hear during daylight hours, it's a barred owl. They are also distributed across Wisconsin, but they like the biggest tract of forest they can find. And so we do not see that concentration or proliferation in the southeast urbanized and agriculturalized part of the state. So they prefer larger tracts of forest. They are the entire US east of the Rockies. And again, no time for it in this talk, but there's a very interesting and kind of disturbing story about their range expansion into the Northwest. It has become real controversial, and if you're interested in it, you should look that up. They're displacing the spotted owl, and they're doing all kinds of things about it. They are a cavity nester, and again, we talked about needing a pretty large cavity for that bird. The last barred owl nest I found was here at Riveredge in a wood duck box that was missing its roof, and we were out checking salamander traps, and one flew off. And so I went around the other side of it, and there was an old nest box there, and I said, I wonder if she came out of there. Went by there the next week, and we could hear coming out of the nest box. And they stay together as a family group for a long time too. And that's another sound you can learn, I don't have a recording of, is the begging juvenile calls of the barred owl. You can hear that through the woods at several yards away. You can hear it, even though it's just a hiss. And that was a very easy confirmation of breeding for the breeding bird atlas, because all we had to do is hear that sound, and we know that's a baby owl. They also eat smaller owls. They eat anything that moves, just like the other owl. And they are in our big forests, and we can see them in a lot of forest types. But in my experience, if you wanted to see a barred owl in this area and get a good look at it, especially around dusk when the light is still good and they're first starting to move, you can't beat floodplain forests around here. And I don't know if that's the structure of silver maples, if there's something about that cathedral-like structure of a floodplain forest. Here at Riveredge, you couldn't beat Mayhew Woods for a barred owl. We can see one down there. If we're down there for 5 days, we might catch a glimpse of a barred owl 2 out of 5 days. Next most likely owl to find, and again, sort of tied with all of these, is our east. Oh, okay. I ask you first, what is it? Eastern screech owl. Um, I actually didn't even know this before preparing this because I hadn't bothered to look at a granular state map. But they're a southern owl here in Wisconsin. And that apparently that data hasn't changed a lot to the second breeding bird atlas. They are sort of replaced in the north by our less common saw-whet owl. But they are also extremely adaptable in urban and agricultural landscapes. It seems to be that deciduous trees with cavities for nesting is sort of the main requisite. And they can also be in parks. And who asked me? Somebody asked me, what's a good subdivision owl? And and I think a screech owl is a pretty good subdivision owl. Um, they're in the entire US east of the Rockies, and they will also eat anything that moves, including a lot of birds. They are most likely to use these pileated and flicker nests. And they're often found in people that run wood duck boxes and maintain them every year and clean them out. They often find screech owls coming out of them. And in fact, my buddy Dan had a mailbox that was missing its door. And before he repaired his mailbox, he went out one week to go get the mail out of the mailbox with no door. And there's a screech owl standing in the mailbox. And he took a picture of it and sent it to me. And then he fixed his mailbox. He goes, um, and they will commonly roost in tree cavities and right at the entrance. And so if you look on the south side of tree, I mean, I've only ever actually found an owl doing this a couple of times, but especially on a cold, sunny day in winter, if you look at the south side of old trees when you're walking past them and look for branch breakoffs and old knot holes, they will sun themselves in there and kind of keep warm. And they'll do it with their eyes closed, and they look every bit like a piece of bark. It's almost like you have to put binoculars on them. And the ear tufts, that's an owl anatomy thing that we haven't discussed. But it hadn't really occurred to me until someone said it to me that, well, that's to look like a broken branch. I thought, oh, that's a really good idea and then it happened to me. I was following a pair of screech owls where I recorded that last volley of owls, and I knew they'd come out of these white pines every night. And so I was laying down underneath this basswood where I knew they first perched when they came up. And I'm laying down on the leaf litter, and I think it saw me. I think it picked me out of the leaf litter. And that little looks like a little round owl here, right? Little football. It turned completely cylindrical, put those ear tufts straight up, and against the silhouette of like a darkening sky, I couldn't find it again, even with binoculars, hardly. I mean, I could, but it was hard to even relocate it. It turned into the silhouette of a branch. And I read books from preparing for this that go all the way back to the 30s of people describing that account. If they want to turn, they even talk about a screech owl having two different poses, and they can instantly turn into a branch, which is pretty neat skill. We heard a lot of their breeding sort of song before. Um, Here is some really close contact, and again, bill snapping sounds that they make. They don't do any hooting. They do all kinds of talking, though. Yeah, absolutely. I don't think it would be doing that unless there was another owl very close. And I can't say if we're hearing one or two right now. But actually, if I had continued playing that other recording where there were two species, it becomes evident later in the recording there are definitely two owls, screech owls. And they're doing this to each other. I forgot that I didn't play it. Yeah. Okay. Terry, this one's for you. Sometimes they just do that rising call. And they often do that song that the popular mnemonics are Who Cooks for You. They often do that without that rising call first. And you see, I would say the most common sound ever heard by anyone of a barred owl, at least in my life, is actually eliminate all of it and just this. And you can hear that often here at Riveredge in the middle of the day.
When did the bar and when did the screech, have their next reading?
I would think by April. And I think I'm not sure. The bard might be a little earlier than the screech, but I just know from last time I knew where some screech owls were nesting, it was like early April. Kind of like frog singing time. They come in two color phases. It's termed a phase. I don't know why, but in birds we talk about morphs and phases. Look it up. There's got to be a difference between those two. I'm not sure, but there are red ones and there are gray ones of eastern screech owls. They're the same species. The eggs in the nest can produce birds of both colors. And that pair that I was monitoring, where one turned into a branch, one was one color and one was the other. So I'm not sure if they have any preference to be with each other or what it means, other than I could see as an evolutionarily genetic thing to kind of toss it up for camouflage might work really well for them. One turns out gray and looks really good in a basswood, and the next one looks really good in a red pine. I don't know. Anybody know this owl? New species. Short-eared owl. I'm kind of cheating on this one because I'm not cheating because I said this was southeast Wisconsin. It'd be unlikely to see this one at Riveredge. Very, very unlikely to see this one at Riveredge. However, in the winter time, you're fairly likely if you make any kind of if you make a little job out of looking, if you make a hobby, I'll say, out of looking for them at dusk in open areas, you stand a pretty good chance of finding one or two short-eared owls every winter. This is one with an enormous range. Like it's got to be really rare among birds that aren't gulls or seabirds, but it's on every continent in the world. By the way, every owl I'm going to show you, even the ones we consider the rarest as birders or as owl nature enthusiasts, according to, you could dig into a lot of other databases, but according to Cornell's real simplified conservation status ranking, all of them, I'm happy to say, are of low concern, meaning their population, maybe not everywhere in the world, but their population overall seems very stable, which is a great news. But if you follow bird conservation, this is the one that their population is going down. And if you follow bird conservation, this is the one that's not surprising because it's a grassland bird. And all of our grassland birds are suffering. And it's largely due to habitat loss. So we see here in the first breeding bird atlas, they were found in a couple of places around Wisconsin. The purple blocks are confirmed breeding. And I haven't taken the time to see on the map where these are, but I bet you one is Kill Snake State Wildlife Area, and I bet you the other one is Buena Vista Grasslands. And I don't know which is which. Again, I'd have to pull out a map.
I think they've seen them now in the southern, Sheboygan River Marsh.
Oh, that would be really cool. They nest on the ground. I think they probably prefer short grass prairie to tall grass, but it seems like they will use both. And I mean, Buena Vista Grasslands has not much real prairie in it per se anyway. It's like a lot of smooth brome and weeds. Um, but so they come here in winter and they're escaping the worst cold and the deepest snow, and they're coming mostly from the American West and the prairie provinces of Canada, and maybe like the rangeland of the American West. And they disperse and move around in winter. They don't need to find someplace warm, but maybe someplace that's not -40 with 3 feet of snow. And so we see them all around southeast Wisconsin. They're really truly are crepuscular. It's like once the sun gets below a certain angle and you're standing there on a freezing highway over a farm field where your buddy said he saw them, all of a sudden they just appear. And they hunt 4 or 5 feet off the ground, and they hunt like like the tractor that plowed that field, back and forth and back and forth. And when they find a vole, they turn up in the air and wham, and they, at least in my experience, they eat the vole immediately and keep going. And they eat it about that fast. They just swallow the vole whole and keep going. I don't know how late in the night they go. I have seen them in headlights before. I think they do hunt after dark, but that would be hard for us to watch anyway. So maybe people don't really know how late, but they certainly start in the daytime. So these dots on the map, I said where they breed, and they breed in Wisconsin. And it's just kind of an interesting note to me that when we had extensive prairie, it was all, in some kind of line blob area down around here when we had prairie in this southern part of the state. The fact that they're up there is because some kind of farming failed. And the county or the federal government took over the land. I mean, Buena Vista Grasslands is interesting. That was a tamarack and black spruce swamp. And if you go up there now, it's all ditched. The ditches still remain. And so we turned it into a grassland to make more grassland in Wisconsin and preserve the greater prairie chicken that was presumably already in the area. But the short-eared owl cannot find any remnant grassland in Wisconsin anymore. It's gone. We don't have any remnant grassland big enough for them. And our small prairies at Riveredge are not going to attract a breeding short-eared owl. They're too hungry for that, I think, is part of the reason they need a large extensive grassland. In fact, there's a research study in Finland that studied 40 pairs of short-eared owls and their young nesting in an 8 square mile plot of land. And they estimated that at one breeding season, they ate 30,000 voles. 38,000 voles. So they're a farmer's friend. But we don't have much habitat for them here anymore. And I don't have a recording for them. And what I've listened to is just sort of like little squeaks and squawks and screams. So you can see, at least on our continent, they're in the north all the way up to Alaska, and that blue is how far south they'll distribute in the winter. Saw-whet owl. Yep, this is Wisconsin's smallest owl. Let's see, we have a picture of that. Yeah, we could see they truly are. I guess it changes on the West Coast, but as far as a Midwest centric view, they're more of a boreal forest owl. A lot of their breeding range is going to be north of Wisconsin. But we see here that in the northern tier of counties, they breed, and they are migratory, like the short-eared owl is migratory. They go pretty far south. These go pretty far south in the winter. And so in this area, our best chance of seeing or hearing a saw-whet owl is in the winter. They come down here in the winter. And that's part of the reason that owl prowls are in the winter, because we've got actually a little more diversity of owls here in the winter. Part of it owing to these guys. They are also a cavity nester. And by small, I mean they're like about like this big. Um, so they were most common in the first breeding bird atlas in mixed forest, meaning coniferous and deciduous mixed, which is way more common up north. And I think that mixed nature might go into that roosting habitat I talked about, where they can disappear into dense conifers during the when they're roosting. So a good way to find them as now I took this picture on my knees. So this is how thick this was, okay? And the owl wasn't there, but I see that somebody's been sitting there. And underneath that was a little midden of pellets. Um, and these were tiny little pellets and a tiny little branch that only a tiny little foot could fit around. And it was in the winter. So a saw-whet owl was real likely for that roosting location. And so a mix of conifer ages where they can nestle down in. In fact, some of you must know Tom Utek. I did a Christmas bird count with him and John O'Donnell several years ago, where he casually takes us on a walk through his property, and he goes up to a bough of a conifer, and he goes, "Check this out, guys." And he pulls the bough away, and there's a saw-whet owl standing in there. I mean, it was like showing you a teacup in his cupboard. He just pulls it aside, and there's the saw-whet owl, and then he puts it back, and he goes, "Wasn't that cool?" And then so, I mean, that owl is just using its camouflage in a very secluded place. It's not like it was going to fly away once it was found. It just sat there. Their migratory nature makes their true estimation of their range in Wisconsin a little hard to determine because in late winter or early spring, we could be finding a migrating one, a breeding one, or a wintering one. And it makes it a little bit hard to determine. And, like a lot of owls, good luck finding breeding evidence. This is the most common vocalization I think there is to hear, and this is not a breeding song. I'm not totally sure what it's for, but this I recorded at Spruce Lake Bog up in the northern Kettle Moraine near Dundee. So it's a rising cry from which they get their name. The whetting of a saw, I think and their breeding song also recorded up at Spruce Lake Bog, which incidentally down here, a good place to find a mixed forest is in something that the locals call a bog, some kind of swamp. I mean, I think the Cedarburg Bog is pretty full of saw-whets right now. And that's got a good mix of deciduous and coniferous trees, especially around the edges of it. I got to be going way too long, so I'm going to pull ahead till he gets a little louder here. It's a beautiful sound though. It's that monotone tooting. And I think if we all lived way up north, we would know that sound more. But because we experiencing them here during their migration, we don't hear that quite so much down here. There happened to be a pair. This was in 2024. There happened to be a pair of them at Spruce Lake Bog all winter. And did they breed there? They really could have. I stopped following them, actually. I kind of regret it. But with a pair of them there, even during the winter, they were doing breeding singing. He changes pitch a little later in this, which I really wish we had. I'm so into this sound. I actually wish I could take each one of you and put a set of headphones on you. And then really force you to stay there and listen to the full 45 minutes of this recording. Yeah. And then when he like changes pitch from toot 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 to I'll be like, God, did you hear the pitch change? Oh man. That is so good. Oh, here, look at this. Dramatic difference there. Little higher. Pretty neat. And then, oh, okay. I bet you there are more saw-whet owls around here right now than there are short-eared owls, but I put saw-whet owl in terms of ease of detection because they're not going to do a big performance over a cut cornfield. We're going to have to try to find this little tiny owl or one of its sounds. So, oh, sorry, not in the. Okay. This is all gross picket. This owls are kind of gross. Okay, what owl is this? Okay, long-eared owl. Um, really, really hard to detect. And these have all been forest owls until we got to the short-eared owl as a grassland owl. We've got one more grassland owl that's even rarer, which is our last owl. I'm calling this a forest owl, but it kind of not. It's a forest owl that hunts fields. So their habitat is again not real rare, but the only time I've ever seen one was in a place maintained as grassland by U.S. Fish and Wildlife. And in the middle of that habitat is a very dense cluster of cedars. And they roost in there and hunt in that open grassland at night. We find them in the northern Kettle Moraine in kind of wetland clearings or what little scraps of sedge meadow we have, or maybe next to that old grazing land in the northern Kettle Moraine that's kind of rocky and sandy and never really seems to have grown in any kind of forest. And they'll be roosting in thick trees, and surprisingly often in shrubs, like shrub willows. Sometimes you'll find them roosting right in front of you. And Dennis sent me, they're all the way around the world at our latitude. Dennis sent this picture, which is like the sighting of a lifetime. So they're famous for roosting in groups. More.
Broken branch.
There's one over here kind of turning away from us. In the top right.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, there, wow.
So they roost in groups. I found in that old series of books, the Arthur Cleveland Bent series, which is still cited in a bird book written in 2026 is still going to cite these old books written in the 1930s called the Arthur Cleveland Bent series. And what's interesting is we think of them as hard to find now, but some of us suspect they're a little more common than we think. The reason I suspect that is because I put out overnight recording equipment as a hobby. And on 3 different deployments of my recording equipment in 3 different counties just this winter, I've recorded this bird. So I don't think they're all that rare. And sure enough, way back in 1938, Arthur Cleveland Bent was postulating that I think this bird's around quite a bit. We just can't find it. And I think that's true.
About how big the thing?
Like so, I think. They're another one that can get real slim, and then they have a lot of feather. All these owls have a lot of feathers proportionally to their actual body size. And so when they're fluffed out in the cold, they look big. When they want to disappear, they go like this. When they're ready to hunt, they're down and long. So they can look different. The last time I saw one, it was horizontal and very football shaped, like a great horned owl. But sometimes you see a lot of pictures where they're really tall and slim. The recordings I have of this owl are pretty bad. So they have a huge range. I've already discussed that. And they also have a conservation status of least concern. Ornithologists aren't particularly worried about the future of this owl. Yet an avid bird watcher finds this owl to be sort of the holy grail of owls because they're extremely hard to find. And so, and it's really a needle in a haystack to hear one in person. Well, I made a recording several nights ago where in the 8 or 9 hours of the recording, again, I'm not there. I set this out and then I analyzed the recording. In the 8 or 9 hours of the recording, these guys made sound in every one of those hours, but then they'd go often more than an hour with no sound at all. And the sound they do make is extremely subtle and easy to overlook. They don't have a song per se. They just make sounds. I've um I've turned up the gain on this a lot to boost the volume because again, if you had headphones on, this would be a much better experience. So excuse the excuse the white noise in this. But this is a pretty classic probably a breeding or territorial song. Can you hear it? Um when I look at these sound files, I have in my head, how close was this to a cow yard? Because I think you could record a cow bellowing at a distance that would sound like a long-eared owl. But that's about it. They make some barks. They make some, and it's not like that was just a clip of some much longer song it made. It was in the same spot, near as I can tell, totally silent for about 2 hours, and then it made three sounds. That was it. So they are hard to detect. Their diet is varied like all the owls, but I found a lot of reference that they really are big time rodent eaters. 80 to 90% of their diet, especially during the winter, is rodents. He's being a little more expressive in this recording. There's a great horned owl in it. The popping in this is the night sound of frozen trees splitting their grain. Do you hear that one? That was a good one. I love those frozen tree sounds. They come in all different pitches and okay, it gets really wild coming up. Sounds like a goose. Like I got to go back to that spot. This is not far from the Milwaukee River and see if there's any open water. I might have just play you guys a goose recording. That'd be embarrassing. Dennis, can you share with us, not the precise location or anything, but the story behind that amazing photograph you took? And thank you for sharing it, by the way.
I've been told by, I'm a new birder, but I've been told by the birders that are educating me that we shouldn't be talking about the location of it.
No.
But it is, broadly in urban Milwaukee,
Okay.
in a wooded area with an adjacent grassland in the middle of a high traffic area, and there's 11 of them.
That's
I know
amazing.
7 of them, there's 11 of them all together, right?
That's really neat.
Yeah, we did it for about 2 weeks.
Wow, it's really cool. Yeah.
We were almost on a rat hole, so that company.
Okay, this is another photograph thanks to Dennis. Aren't they beautiful? In terms of ID, they're overall smaller than a great horned owl. The ear tufts are not set way out here on the head, but they're set kind of a little more on top. And that facial disc, which aids in hearing, I believe, on owls that they have is a beautiful tawny red, kind of like a red squirrel type of red in all.
Shot, there's a real dense shrub that are all in, not tree. And they were all just sitting there and you could stare at her for 4 minutes without seeing anything.
And it was a dense area next to a grassland.
Yeah.
Okay, our last and almost at this point theoretical owl to see in southeast Wisconsin is the barn owl, but they're in here because they do breed in Wisconsin. So this is a grassland bird that learned to coexist with humans in agriculture over the centuries. It's kind of like the barn swallow of the owl world. And so I imagine when I read their habitat description and where they've been found nesting and their hunting habits, I imagine they were basically a prairie owl. I mean, we're talking, let's say 1,000 years ago. I bet they were a prairie owl that nested in tree cavities, like in river bottoms and draws in large prairies that didn't get burned and the edges of prairies and hunted the prairies. But they learned how to use old buildings and barns in grazing land to hunt rodents. And you can find those old books from the 30s. There are wonderful stories of the bizarre places they nested. Steeples of churches, abandoned buildings, on tin roofs. They don't build any kind of a nest at all. They might move around a couple of wood chips or something like that, and they just sort of deposit their eggs in these old structures. So the history of them in Wisconsin is they were probably, oh, this is another one. They are found on all continents and their status is of low concern. But we are, and we always have been, on the very northern edge of their range. They're much more common down south. And interestingly, apparently in California is kind of the most common, I don't know, sort of the epicenter of them in America. So they've never been common here. And the first Wisconsin breeding bird atlas found only 3 nests statewide. And when we get really private about a bird, we zoom out from that 3 mile by 9 mile block to a county, right? Because we don't want people like Dennis bugging them with a camera.
He's like church, which is north of Fredonia there.
But so the first breeding bird atlas found only 3 nests. The second breeding bird atlas found no nests. But then in 2021, in someone's backyard in La Crosse, one fell out of a hollow tree, a baby, and the people didn't know what it was, and they took it to a wildlife rehabilitator, and they said, "Holy cow, I think this is a barn owl." And it was the first documented barn owl nest in Wisconsin in 21 years. So they're here sometimes. And for any of our birds that concentrate themselves around rodent populations, around agriculture, you always have to wonder about their health. I mean, I don't know, how much toxicology work has been done on a meadow vole in Buena Vista grasslands versus a meadow vole in a cow field by a dairy barn. I would imagine that's got to be part of these owls' stories in the future. And I don't have a recording of this one. So does anyone have any questions or stories? Okay.
Okay, and you'd like, but I will stop the recording, you'll hear that next.
Oh, I think I just did it.
Is there a predator for the owl besides other owls?
For the great horned owl? No. No, so I mean, I would think not. Not at, not for a barred owl in this part of the world. Excuse me, especially a great horned owl in this part of the world. I think that's the end of that line of the food web. They are an apex predator. They really